Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 8 of the Level Up Symposium. My name is Andrew Schäfer. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a very special event, an in-progress demonstration of the new opera, I Am Alan Turing, presented by the Associated Designers of Canada, with support from Toaster Lab's Mixed Reality Performance Atelier. I am one of the co-curators of the symposium and a member of the ADC, and I am very excited to be your host for this event. I'd like to first acknowledge that I am coming to you from the settler city of Montreal, which long before colonizers arrived was a place of conference, conflict, and creativity for many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Abenaki peoples. This land is known by the current caretakers of the land, the Ganyangahaga Nation, as Chachage, which means broken in two because of the way the St. Lawrence River breaks around the island. I am honored and humbled to be here to share and create with you all, so I offer my thanks. In the spirit of gratitude, I'd also like to bring your attention to the chat window of the Zoom room, where you'll be able to find a land acknowledgement which has been created specifically by our presenters today. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts, our primary funder of the symposium as a whole, as well as our other sponsors, the IATSE, University of British Columbia, Theatre Alberta, CITT Alberta Chapter, Concordia University, Ryerson University, York University, and of course, all of our own individual donors. Thank you all very much. So for the information of those of you here in the Zoom room, this event is being recorded and streamed live and will be presented in a freely available archive on our website within a few days of the event. Thank you everyone joining us out in the streaming world as well. So you are also watching this live stream either on the Level Up website, which is levelup.designers.ca, on HowlRound at howlround.com, or through our partners at Toaster Lab on the respective Facebook pages of the ADC or at Toaster Lab. Now, regardless of your viewing platform, out in the streaming world, embedded on the same page as your video is a chat function in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your questions can be asked in the chat at any time and will be read out to the presenters later on in the presentation. For those of you here in the room with us, you can add your questions at any time in the chat below. For this event, unfortunately, there will not be access to live captions. However, the archive of the event will include that option. We apologize for any inconveniences this will cause. However, if you require technical assistance to support your access to this event in the Zoom room itself, you can chat directly with Patrick in the chat window. It's Level Up Tech. Or in the streaming world, please email levelup@designers.ca for immediate support or to provide feedback following the event. If you enjoy this session or any of our sessions of the Level Up Symposium, please consider donating to the Associated Designers of Canada to support our National Arts Service Organization in achieving its goals of advocacy, mentorship, and industry promotion. Donation links are available on all of our viewing platforms, on our website, the ADC's website, or on canadahelps.org. So please consider donating. Thank you for your patience with all of our announcements. This presentation is best experienced with headphones. Please, all the viewers within Zoom, could you please turn your screen to gallery view in the top right-hand corner of your window? You can select that there. Please also make sure to mute yourself, turn off your video, and please select hide non-video participants. So you can do this either by clicking on someone who does not currently have their video running at top 3 little dots in the corner and select hide non-video participants, or you can go to your video settings next to the stop video in the bottom left-hand corner of your Zoom window. Click on the little arrow, go into your video settings, and there's a little checkbox for that. So this presentation will be starting with an audio piece, and there will be a designated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. But as I mentioned before, if you have any questions, please do share those at any time during the presentation. And I think that's it. So thank you very much and enjoy the presentation.
Can machines think?
Yes. If a human can be constructed to answer this question, why not a machine?
The idea that machines can think is not knew. Charles Babbage, Alexander Graham Bell,
George Bernard Shaw,
among others, were interested in the idea. They thought that a man could not be so stupid as to let a machine think.
You cannot make a machine to think for you.
You cannot make a machine to think for
You
you.
cannot make a machine to think for
You
himself.
cannot make a man to think for himself.
we can only hope that machines will eventually compete with women in all fields, because a collective human-machine conflict will always be, to some extent, unavoidable.
Can machines think?
No. Consciousness comes from the idea that we are collectively involved in the process of creation. From this idea, we learn about what to
I feel this kind of feeling,
Learn about what to
what
think,
to
what not
believe.
to think.
After all, I'm not a person who feels a lack of expectation.
Who feels a lack
The
of expectation.
afterlife is not
I feel this kind of feeling when I think the things I'm thinking about. The moral of the story is how we must strive to protect every
every
human
human being to the last.
The universe
moves on itself.
Can machines think? Naturally.
I am
Alan Turing,
and I am writing this
and
film.
I am writing this for you.
I'm a Turing machine, baby. I'll go on forever, baby. I'm a Turing machine, baby. I'll go on forever, baby. I'm a Turing machine, baby. I'm a Turing machine, baby. My tape is infinite, baby. Just like the universe, baby. I'll go on forever, baby. I'll go on forever, baby.
I'm a Turing machine, baby. My tape is infinite, baby. I'll go on forever, baby. Just like the universe, baby.
Everything that you do, everything that you do, everything that you do, everything that you do, everything that you do is on my tape, and I'll go on forever, baby.
I'm a Turing machine, baby. My tape is infinite, baby. I'll go on forever, baby. Just like the universe, baby. I'm a Turing machine, baby.
I did believe it possible for a spirit at death to go to a universe entirely separate from our own. But now I consider matter and spirit so connected, this would be a contradiction. Such universes may exist.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, tonight, wherever you happen to be. If you've just joined in the last few minutes, we'd recommend switching your Zoom display to gallery view or checking the instructions in the chat. My name is Hugh Farrell, and I'm a dramaturg and a producer, and more recently have turned my hand to UX design as the tech world has discovered the benefits of dramaturgy. If you can't tell from my accent, I'm sitting in my apartment in Dublin, Ireland tonight. And I want to say a huge thanks to Andrew and Emily and the whole team at the Level Up Festival for bringing us together despite our distance. We're delighted to share our project with so many of you here on the Zoom call and on the live stream tonight. And we're excited to hear your questions and feedback. We've set aside a whole half hour at the end for questions. So if you have them along the way, if they come up for you along the way, please just put them in the chat and our moderator will collect them all for the end. Today, we're going to tell you about an opera we've been creating called I Am Alan Turing. I'll give you some background on the project first, and then I'll introduce you to our creative team who are going to lead a kind of a show and tell of our process and our work so far. Our opera is based on Alan Turing, and for any of those who aren't familiar with him, he was a groundbreaking mathematician and cryptographer who put forward the imitation game, or the Turing test, for artificial intelligence. Turing famously cracked the German Enigma codes during World War II, and in the process invented the computer, something he had imagined and published the theory of years before. He was also a biologist and was fascinated by the appearance of numbers everywhere in life, the prime numbers and the Fibonacci sequences in particular. He used his first computer at Manchester University in the 50s to calculate the chemical basis for the patterns in leopards and zebras, now known as Turing patterns. Tragically, he took his life, aged 41, after he was sentenced to estrogen hormone treatment as a corrective punishment for being gay. For 2 years, we as a team have been researching Turing and imagining ways to create a Turing test for the theater, blurring the lines between machines and minds. Our process has led us to the archives at King's College in Cambridge, where we read Turing's papers. In the typescript of his 1950 paper on computing machinery and intelligence, where he proposed to consider the question, can machines think? We noticed his handwritten edition, trying to understand what the machines are trying to say. We'll pop a link from that Turing archive in the chat so you can see it for yourself. Over the last 2 years, the standard of artificial intelligence has exploded. In February 2019, OpenAI in San Francisco released GPT-2, a natural language processing algorithm. GPT-3 came out last year, and we've been working with developers at Yale's Digital Humanities Lab to run an instance of GPT-2, which we trained on the world of words Turing encountered in his life. The GPT-2 algorithm learns to express apparently meaningful sentences based on material it has read. We wondered if we could collaborate with an AI like this to generate the libretto for an opera. Today, we're going to give you a demonstration of how far we've come on that journey and the new directions we're discovering along the way. Since March of 2020, we've been meeting as a technical, producing, and a devising group 3 times a week on Zoom. It seems fitting that the computer has become the venue for our interactions on an opera about Alan Turing. What you've heard so far and seen this evening at the start of our presentation is some of what we've been creating. We're working in a virtual space, but our intention is to create a live performance with opera singers, a full choir, live electronics, an orchestra, and all the bells and whistles of theater. On the way, we're interested in creating digital ways to engage our audience and feed into our process, and today or tonight is one of these moments. Thanks again for being here. Keep the questions coming in the chat and we'll collect them in the Q&A at the end. But for now, I'm going to hand off to the rest of the team to introduce themselves, and we'll begin with our composer, Matthew Suttor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Suttor. As you said, I'm the composer on the project, and I'm here in New Haven, Connecticut, where I teach at Yale. And I pitched this idea to Hugh and Vlad originally, it was 2 years ago, with the idea that we create a monodrama around Turing. So the idea is that it's not a biographical piece, but it's about his ideas. And I wanted to use live electronics. I'm sitting here in my studio surrounded by Moog synthesizers. And I've always been taken as a composer by the way in which small numbers behave. So this is very much part of Turing's writings. And of course, small numbers to musicians mean rhythms and intervals. So the piece that you heard first is based on the interaction of prime numbers. And overlaid on top of that is text that was generated by GPT-2. So the text is entirely produced by an artificial intelligence. And then we segue into a rather shocking discovery for us. We had a brief go on GPT-3, which supposedly is one of the most powerful natural language algorithms models available. It's not available to the public just yet. And we asked it, write a sexy song in the style of Britney Spears about Alan Turing, and 3 seconds later it produced that song. So here we are following a devising process using this text, and in some ways really just following where the process takes us. And then the last piece is, which was written over the weekend and sung gloriously by Sola Fadiran, is a text that Turing wrote called The Nature of Spirit in response to the death of his high school friend, Christopher Morcom. So we're in an interesting place where we have a mixing of aesthetics. We intend to use live instruments. Obviously, we're going to be using live electronics, which is a crazy world to be involved in because it's so performative. This is a collaborative piece. I'm working with Frederick Kennedy, who's a wonderful percussionist, Liam Bellman-Sharpe, who is a composer and a singer. Already mentioned Sola, who is an actor and an opera singer. And we're working somewhat akin to a way in which a band might work, where we have a kind of group process, which is largely to do with the circumstances in which we find ourselves right now in the middle of a pandemic. But it's also because the work is driving us to do that as we engage with this AI. I'd like to hand over to Dakota Stipp, who's going to talk more about GPT-2.
All right, thanks. So as Matthew said, I'll introduce GPT-2 as one of our collaborators, but before I do that, we'll go around our group here and introduce ourselves. So I'm Dakota, he, him pronouns, and I'm a designer, software developer, working on the project in a number of ways. Fred, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi. My name is Fred Kennedy, fellow Canadian. You all the Canadians. Nice to virtually be back in my home country for a moment. I'm a percussionist and sound designer, music producer, and also based in New Haven, just a few blocks from Matthew.
Hey, I'm Tyler Kieffer. I'm here in Brooklyn, New York. I'm one of the few sound designers we have on this project and theater maker.
Hi, I'm Julia Schäfer. I'm originally from Switzerland, but tuning in from Brooklyn. I'm a graphic designer and recent graduate from the Yale School of Art. And I support the team with all sorts of graphic inputs and visual communication.
Hi, I'm Emily Reilly, calling in from Brooklyn, but originally from England via Ireland. I'm a dramaturg and also a creative producer and know something about communications and publicity in the theater world as well. I'm working with the team being many different things right now as we're still very much in process.
Hi everybody, I'm Vlad Woyno. I'm a theater maker and visual designer. I'm normally primarily working in video and projection technology. I've been, like Matthew said, I've been kind of engaging with this for a couple of years now. It's unbelievable that it feels like it's been that long. And it's been really exciting. I'm currently based in Vancouver, and I teach at Simon Fraser University.
Hi, I'm Liam Bellman-Sharpe. I'm originally from Australia, but based in New Haven with some of the other folks here at the moment. I am a composer and sound designer and musician, and I'm sort of working on this project in those capacities, as well as sort of like some sort of studio and synth wrangling.
Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline Pages, she, her, hers, currently calling in also from New Haven. I'm a dramaturg and currently a student in dramaturgy at the Yale School of Drama.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sola Fadiran, and I'm an actor currently studying at Yale School of Drama. And I'm a singer, an opera singer. And I'm also most recently a writer and director. And I'm supporting the group by singing and acting and devising, theater making.
Okay, so so there's our team and one more member to introduce, and that's GPT-2. So I'll talk a bit about that. So GPT-2 and GPT-3 are both natural language models. And so at a high level, a natural language model works by decomposing language into tokens, and then creating a graph of probabilities that a given token will follow another token based on its input. So with Doug Duhaime at the Digital Humanities Lab, and also with Fareed Abdul, who's an intern with the Center for Collaborative Arts and Media at Yale, we created an interface for the team to interact with an instance of GPT-2, as mentioned earlier, and that's a language model by OpenAI. And so that's generated a bunch of text for us. We also had a brief opportunity to interact with GPT-3. So a lot of this output is, a little kind of meaningless without context, and we'll show you what it means. But when it's spoken by a person and when it's sung, it takes on kind of an impressive human quality that we're all fascinated with. Our devising process has been inspired by these conversations with these models. We've tried to figure out how to get our own minds to generate language, taking inspiration from Einstein's ideas of combinatory play, where he would play the violin to free his consciousness of logic in order to form new ideas. We developed a series of games that we sort of play in an ongoing way with each other based on generating words, imagery, and dramatic scenes impulsively with no filter in the moment, using loose conceptual associations and other kinds of parameters. The idea is to create rules for ourselves that reflect the rules within a natural language, within which a natural language model operates. Our aim is to think without thinking. And to give you a sense of what the models produce and what they're capable of, and how we're using it, we'll now read a few selections to demonstrate the range and the kind of content that they generate.
What I'm about to read was created by GPT-3, and the prompt was to write a poem in the style of Dr. Seuss. When a packet hits a pocket on a socket on a port, and a protocol is defined in a transport on a host, you know precisely what the CPU is going to do. Now a packet hits a pocket on a socket on a port, but the protocol has the wrong address, or the queue is full, or the pocket's ripped, and the packet hits the deck. He's not out, he's not safe, he's not even in. He's in the ether somewhere, and the CPU waits for him. This is what we call a hung state, and it is bad. If the CPU could talk, he would say, more haste, less speed.
And I'm going to read a response from GPT-2, our model that we trained on different things that Turing had written and read in his lifetime. And this, we posed the question, what is art? And its response is, art is the process of making something beautiful. It is the most important of the human activities. The most important human activity is the making of art. The most important human activity is the making of art. The human activity of making art consists of a series of steps. In the simplest form, we have the following steps. 1, select the material. 2, measure it. 3, mix it. 4, form it. 5, place it in the display. 6, make it look like a work of art. 7, make it available for sale. 8, make it available for reproduction. 9, make it available for comparison and evaluation. 10, make it available for comparison and evaluation. The human activity of making art is the most important human activity. It is the most important human activity because it is the one which is most difficult to perform. It is the most important human activity because it is the one which is most important to judge.
And here's an example also from GPT-2, where the question posed was why we would need machines. And the response was, we needed the machine to make the human being comfortable. It is to give them something to have with them on the job that is safe, comfortable, and satisfying. I mean the very human feeling of having good food every day and having a comfortable bed every night. If we had built a machine that did that, we could have built something that would probably be useful for a long time. That is why I think there can be no doubt that someday there is going to be a great improvement in the quality of life and in the comfort of life, but I have no illusions about the future.
This, I think, was one of the earlier samples that we received from GPT-2. It says, you cannot say, I do not believe in God, because if you did, the machine would say, I have no reason to believe in God, but you do.
This is also from GPT-2. I don't have the prompt for this one, but it is presented with an explicit language warning and with no comment. And verbatim. I put it to you that you are only pretending to be a man. You are not a man. You are a piece of shit. 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 You are a piece of shit.
So there's a fun variety of some of the responses we get. Now we'll move to a kind of a live demonstration of our devising process, or a taste of it, to see how we kind of input some of the language model text into our own work.
Great, and as Dakota gets ready to lead us through the devising session, which we are doing live, and we have no idea what the prompts are that he's prepared for us today. Dakota is kind of our devising spirit guide that we meet with him every Friday as a group, and we co-write together. And so we're going to be sharing this devising process with you by screen sharing, so you can watch us write in a Google Doc. For those of you that are at home and watching on the live stream, you'll get a link to the Google Doc so you can watch us in real time. And for those of us in the Zoom call, we'll screen share with you right now. And as you watch us work, I invite you to pay attention to words, phrases, and ideas that resonate with you, and to look out for language tics and patterns you see developing. And we'd love to hear about what stuck out for you during the conversation part of today's presentation. So here we go, over into the Google Doc.
All right, looks like we're mostly accounted for. I think I'm missing one name, perhaps. And we'll have people join with the view link as well. So, all right, team, we're gonna jump on down to the bottom here where you see me typing. This is Dakota. And we're gonna start with our first question, our first prompt, with about 1 minute to respond. All right, we're gonna start to wrap it up. Finish your response. Great. Now we're jumping on down to the bottom, to a couple spaces down below. We'll move on to the next question. We're gonna begin to wrap this up. Finish your thought there. We're down to page 5 now. Our next question. We're going to start to wrap this one up. Finish your thought. We're on down to the bottom here. Next question. And the last question here on the bottom. All right, and begin to wrap up your thought. Excellent. Thanks for playing, team. So now we're just going to jump up to the top of the document and read our responses to each question in a rotating order. So we'll start with our first question here on page 2. Who is Alan Turing? And Matthew will begin us with the first response.
Man who invented computer.
Lonely, lives on, punished by UK government.
Luminary.
Coldest computer baby.
Dead.
Alive in thought.
Emily, you're muted.
Hello. Sorry, I had to run for my charger. Can someone take my go this time?
Yep. Gay.
Genius.
Cyclist.
Shola.
Visionary.
Code breaker.
Inner life.
Mystery.
So British.
Schoolboy.
Romantic.
He enjoyed nature?
Biologist.
Fear itself.
Not being.
Yeah, go ahead. It looks like we broke our Google Doc this time around.
Yeah, we did.
Because I can't grab that text. So let's jump on to a marathon runner, whoever was next.
A marathon
runner. Not free.
Enjoyed running.
A perfectly ordinary homosexual.
A mathematician.
Scholar.
A hero.
A convict.
Homosexual.
He was a homosexual.
Cryptologist, a code breaker, a patent seeker.
Brilliant man.
Mathematician.
I think he was involved with World War II.
A humble human.
Alan Turing is dead. He has been dead for quite some time now.
He is survived by the things that bear his name.
Humanist.
Not a party animal.
Awkward.
Alan Turing rode a bike with a gas mask on.
The gas mask was on Alan, not on the bike.
He rode the bike through England.
Okay, next question. What is opera?
Stuffy.
Extravagant.
Big feelings.
Expensive.
Spectacle.
Lucius.
Often about women killing themselves because they are sad about men.
A sometimes long and slow form of song.
Grand in its presentation and budgets, sometimes.
Boring.
Big drama.
Did.
Voices.
Everything.
Vikings.
A way to explore the human.
Lord. Irrelevant.
A warm soaking.
Lush.
Cold sometimes.
Explosions.
Some of its parts.
A total work of art.
A Turing test.
Song drama.
Music does the work and the voice plays the emotion.
Can be improvised or not.
Opera is when people sing aloud.
Crazy people with crazy ideas.
You can't sing that loud and not sing opera.
People mostly don't use microphones, but sometimes they secretly do, even the Met.
Emotions.
As a word, opera just means work, as in opus or operate.
An art form involving loud singing and very elaborate set design.
What is intelligence?
Intelligence.
Go for it.
Oh, sorry. Are we going round or are you going to take over, Matthew?
Intelligence is bodily.
Intelligence is a kind of spirit.
Intuition.
Experience. Real life experience.
Aptitude.
An evolving thing.
Not set in stone.
Don't you want to know?
Ideas harnessed.
Secrets.
Amassed.
Hoarded.
To know or to not know.
Power.
Hidden.
Money.
The economy stupid.
Elon Musk.
An agency somewhere.
Something machines can have and humans. Understanding the universe or oneself. Do machines have selves? Can they understand their selves?
Generally, a correlation of what is in our minds that have been collected by the brain through the use of our sensory inputs that begins to create self-awareness.
Social trust.
Intelligence is the ability to build a model of the world based on your experience of it and predict what will happen next in the world.
Reflecting deeply on something.
The ability to differentiate.
What is natural intelligence if artificial intelligence is a thing?
It's what makes me human.
The force behind all that is.
The voices in my head.
What does it mean to trust?
Safety. To believe in safety. To believe you are held. To believe the pain will be manageable. To be brave in growth. To be in communion with others. To grasp at hope.
Faith, understanding, connection, and knowing.
Security in the knowledge that truth is safe between us.
Feel the fear and do it anyway.
Freedom.
Love.
Humility.
Continual process.
Dispassion.
Fear itself.
Not being able to produce.
Criticism.
Being shown myself.
Fear itself.
Not being able to produce.
Criticism.
Being shown myself.
Falling.
Being connected to the people you love.
Catching.
Vulnerability.
Danger.
To trust is to live fully.
Togetherness without fear.
Power in choice to choose to believe.
Giving without expectation.
To let go.
To forgive.
Part of being human.
To look at each other in the eye and know truth.
A sickening feeling that you might be wrong.
Trust is money.
Believing the model you have made of someone in your head to be accurate.
A reason to live.
If your mind is in peace.
The opposite of antitrust.
The opposite of Jeff Bezos.
Trust is like when a cat slow blinks at you or closes its eyes around you or lets you touch its feet.
Love jumping off a bridge.
Unachievable.
What are you afraid of?
Afraid of being discovered as a fraud.
When I was 8, I used to have trouble sleeping, would stare up at the ceiling and have nightly terror thoughts about the fact that the universe is so big.
Inability to act.
That those I love will find out I'm a phony.
Being stranded, being lost, floating off into space.
Poisonous spiders.
White supremacy.
Nuclear holocaust.
Imprisonment. Sorry, Nazis and their enablers.
Losing someone else's mind.
Imprisonment.
Being all alone.
Being found out.
That the sadness might creep in and never leave.
Hordes of rats.
Solitude.
Running out of money.
That when I rub my hands into my eyes, there will be chili on them.
Ignorance.
Sinkholes.
Losing mom.
Ineffectuality.
That brings us to the end of our list. So normally our next step after this would be to begin to play an associative game where we try to connect bits and pieces from the different categories and prompts that we were given and try to come up with larger kind of structural scenes around those things. But of course, for time, we won't do that today. And now I'll hand it over to Vlad and Julia to talk a little bit about the visual aspects of the show.
Thank you, Dakota. Vlad will
Dakota.
share the screen in a second.
All right.
So what you see here is the website for the project that we are developing simultaneously with our weekly devising sessions. And we'll post the link in the chat. Feel free to sign up. So Vlad is signing up here to get updates on the opera and so on. And as you enter the website, it all kind of builds itself up automatically. And the website functions as a trailer in the first place, as well as informing about the project, introducing the team, and listing sponsors. So yeah, when you access the website on your computer, you will notice that it plays the trailer song that you heard at the very beginning. So it's a one-pager that starts on the top and scrolls down. And we were looking for a cinematic feel that combines the text from the devising with images that we converted to ASCII. And Vlad will elaborate on that in a second. And the layout is all made in Sublime Text, which is a source code editor. You see the row numbers on the left are kind of indicating the rows of code. And the layout and the typefaces we used are inspired by the original drawings from Turing and simulate typewriter outputs for reports and technical documentation. And yeah, the website will become an ongoing archive of the work, and yeah, keep looking into it. And I will share screen now, and Vlad will talk a little more about the ASCII.
Yeah, so part of one of the things that I was working with in the depths of the pandemic, kind of sitting at home, I was curious to see if I could. We were playing so much and training the AIs, our GPT-2 model, with papers and different text that we wanted to kind of recognize and essentially create the model based on this text that we had. And I was curious, okay, there are, and I think Julia will show you some of the other things that we've done with kind of AI that is created particularly for image manipulation and generation. But I was curious if I could get the language model that is based on text to kind of work with images. And sort of, this is sort of how I arrived at this kind of like ASCII, this what we call the ASCII, which is kind of converting images into sort of text. And what you're seeing right now is just a quick little demo video of what happens when you take images like these apples that you saw at the beginning and convert them to text to then input into the language model and train the language model with these images. It's ultimately just recognizing patterns and then building on, based on some variables, essentially different iterations or combinations based on probability of that image. And then you just keep, for example, in the images that you're seeing right now, you see the apple kind of gets more and more deconstructed. And so what's happening is that I'm grabbing the apple and turning up that has been turned into text and turning up the randomness variables in the engine. And then I've just taken photographs of that output and I've put it inside of Touch Designer. And in Touch Designer, I can kind of VJ manipulate live this animation that's being created of this kind of deconstructed text apple. And so, it got into like a little bit of pattern matching and pattern recognition, which I think Julia can speak a little bit about in the next couple of slides. She'll show you some other examples that we've played with and how it sort of relates back to Alan Turing and his work.
Thank you. So when thinking about the visual world that we kind of inhabit with Turing's work, we were also looking into archives. So these are Turing's diagrams for his article he wrote on morphogenesis. The images are held at the King's College Archive at the Cambridge University. Turing describes in the 1952 published article, The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis, how patterns in nature, such as stripes and spirals, can arise naturally from a homogeneous uniform state. As, for example, in the fur of certain animals or in the skin of the pufferfish. Thinking about collaborating with an AI on text, as we've done a lot in devising, we also starting to experiment creating images from text with a software called Runway ML. So the text you see on the top, Alan Turing has an apple on his desk, is a text that came from a devising session and then was translated by the software back into an image. Alan Turing is a keen and agile codebreaker fighting to be free. Or Alan Turing is actually a fisherman, and also he's not reading short stories. Or Alan Turing dressed as a woman. And when kind of playing this through, I realized that the data model was mostly trained on interiors. So you might see in some of these that there are parts of like rooms and room interiors that it's made out of, which was interesting. Yeah, I will hand back now to Vlad, and he will show us something that he has been working on, which is a Clipboard Display.
All right, thank you. And if someone could spotlight me, I'll just change my source here. These things. I gotta turn off the background or it doesn't work. So this is my little studio. And what I'll do is I'll switch cameras. So like I said, I've been using Touch Designer as a way to kind of explore a bunch of different physical computing elements, and I've been messing with Arduinos and sensors, as well as some of the earlier conversations that I had with Matthew about what the set would look like in terms of this. I've always imagined some kind of set piece that could evolve and kind of be mechanized. So I've been researching into making kind of mirrors and moving mirrors, and not just one IQ mirror or something like that theatrically, but like talking like 30, 40 mirrors to use with projectors or lasers to kind of be able to build the space as the piece is evolving. And that was always kind of, we were always discussing that as part of the physical installation of the piece. And more recently, kind of as that conversation evolved, and Matthew was really kind of investing in his time with the synthesizers, the analog synthesizers. I felt like we've spent so much time on screen digitally that it would be interesting if we could start moving some of this material into kind of a physical space. And I had seen, I can't remember where I saw it first, but I was really intrigued by this technology. It's sort of they're older displays. They're called flip-dot displays, and what they do, I'll just show you right now. Hopefully that's working. And what they do is that they're actually little magnetized displays, and what they do is they each pixel can be turned on or off. It makes a wonderful sound. I think you might be able to hear it if I turn on my mic a little bit. And it's sort of what they used on bus displays before LEDs were a thing. They're actually very fragile and hard to maintain, so I understand why we switched out, but there is something kind of wonderfully physical about being able to make displays that behave this way. And so part of what I've done with some of these touch designer patches is generate ways of manipulating these displays live. So I could feed them video, I could feed them kind of pre-sampled materials. I think I have a version of an eye here. Let's see if that's, oh, well, that one's not working right now. But yeah, so looking at different ways to kind of physicalize some of the ideas that we've been looking at. So that's been kind of an interesting exploration and continuation of this kind of physicalizing research that we can do while we are in quarantine. Whoops. Yeah, I'll pass it on to Julia, who had some things to say about also kind of some of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of moving forward with some of the visual elements, as well as the website.
Yeah, I think we hand over now to you and Emily.
Thank you, everyone, for staying with us this long. We're just going to give a very brief overview of some next steps for the project, and then we're going to move straight into some questions, which we're really excited to hear your thoughts. So as you can tell, we're still very much in process. Right now, our roles in the project are fluid, but our sort of various expertise are coming to the fore as we start crafting material. We co-write together, we weigh in on creative discussions. So that's where we are right now in the process.
I guess we had planned, well, we managed to have one in-person workshop back in 2019, and we'd planned last summer to have a whole series of workshops in New Haven, but obviously that's all stopped because of the pandemic. So our next big step is to try and reschedule that workshop where we can carve out a few days together to review everything we've generated so far, which is an extraordinary amount of material, and to start to kind of refine and deepen the material that we've generated, the stuff that resonates with us the most, as we start to map it into an overall structure for the opera.
And we've been talking a lot as we've been in process, and as it's been sort of this unwieldy amount of time, and we're staring down the barrel of who knows when theatre will be back, of exploring a staged work in progress showing. This is sort of a process showing that we've been giving you today, but we've been thinking a lot about creating a virtual staged work in progress showing, so we can really start to test out some of these materials on an audience. So that's another thing that's sort of circulating in our collective brains for another next step for the project.
Yeah, and I guess to make all that happen, we're also looking at trying to attract funding partners. We're trying to identify particular institutions that can add to our list of supporters, which include the Digital Humanities Lab at Yale, the Yale Center for Collaborative Media and Arts, and the Yale Center for British Art. So we've been really grateful for their support so far.
And eventually, obviously, as we said before, our dream is to get a tourable staged opera made, a live experience that seamlessly integrates the various virtual elements that we've been exploring so well in this sort of internet space that we've been making the piece on.
And I think that's everything. So I think it's our turn to open it up to the floor, the virtual floor, and invite your questions if anyone has any. We'd be delighted to hear them.
Also noticing comments, all welcome as well.
Mm-hmm.
What makes this an opera? I'm gonna field that over to Matthew Suttor, our resident composer. Matthew, what makes this an opera?
That's a really good question. I think this is an opera simply because of the intention behind it. There will be operatic voices, and what we didn't talk about too much is the theatrical conceit. So in a Turing test, you have three figures. So it's almost a kind of sort of Brechtian play. So you have A, B, and C. A and B may or may not be a computer, and C is the moderator. So we'll have those figures on stage. So there are at least 3 singers, and maybe that there are other voices that step in to be that come from parts of Turing's life and around his work. Although it's never intended as a biographical piece. But going back to say the first opera, which we typically cite Monteverdi's Orfeo, which was written at the beginning of the 1600s. He took the working parts of existing church music and other kinds of theatrical works like masques, etc. So you have recitatives, arias, choruses, and other vocal pieces, and put them together into a new form. So in some sense, we're taking things that already exist, and through this devising process, which is an artificial intelligence, we're coming up with, we're not making claims to it for a new form, we're just really sort of following where this leads. I mean, but there is a kind of surprising aesthetic range here, and we've already got something that, influenced by Britney Spears, arguably, through to things that are much more conventionally recognizable as opera. But I think the healthy thing for me as a composer is that my preconceptions of what opera is has already been shattered, right? So, and this is my 3rd opera, and they're really big experiences to write and to produce, and then receive all the criticism afterwards. Opera critics have more heckles per square inch than any other follicled species. So I mean, the short answer is there's an opera because we say it is, but we're trying to figure that out through this collaborative process. So that's a long, somewhat sort of rambly answer, but there you go.
Great. The next question that came in, I'm going to read it out loud before I try and field it somewhere. Maybe Hugh, you can be thinking about who this should go to while I read it out loud. Do the AI have voices? And how do you give computer a voice?
Well, that's interesting, because in the original Turing test, Turing sets it up that the computer can only speak through a teleprompter, through written text. But for the purposes of our opera, we've been giving a lot of voices to GPT-2's language. I suppose Tyler might talk a bit about the mix of how we add voices to them.
Yeah, sure. It was, in crafting the first piece you heard at the beginning of our presentation, it was all recorded. It was all text generated by GPT-2, but it was recordings of each of our voices, and I was able to stack them on top of each other and through different effects and such kind of create a voice that is kind of a conglomerate of all. And it's been exciting on this journey trying to figure out what that exact question of what is the voice of this AI. And I think at this point, it is all of our voices in a way that is not necessarily trying to trick you like a Turing test, but a machine, why would it be limited to just the robotic voice that we kind of associate with computers, especially in the age of now when technology is growing so quickly. So I think right now it's a lot of us together all kind of like speaking through the text that GPT-2 is generating for us.
Yeah, and I will also say that there's something about like trying to, we do a lot of, and that's why it's not an opera written by AI or something, because the AI is a participant, a collaborator, and we're cherry picking a lot of what we're reading, right? We go through a lot of versions of it, and we kind of throw in what's happening with the AI generation and throw it into our devising text. So it's not like some kind of holy vision always, but it is interesting to humanize the voice and to kind of try to give it something that's a bit more robust than just what shows up on screen. So I think that's also, I don't know if that helps answer that question too.
And I think going with our commendatory play of like throwing logic out the door, we cherry pick these things, but it's also really exciting to work with this thing that it'll give us random crazy responses sometimes, and some things are right on, but to be able to kind of use it to get ourselves out of our own logic has been really fruitful, I think, as well.
So another thing just to say quickly is that we are using vocoders. So we have hardware vocoders to resynthesize spoken and sung voices. So speech synthesis is something I've been interested in for a long time. So we could possibly use that, or we've been using vocoding, but we haven't used actual speech synthesis yet, because in some ways I'm sort of trying to stay away from the digital domain and concentrate on analog gear. The other interesting thing is that GPT-2 has been used to create music. So there is an OpenAI application with this language model called Jukebox. And interestingly, once we started using GPT-2 to create text and we're in communication with OpenAI, they came back to us and said, what do you think about this new application that we're using? So you can create like an Ella Fitzgerald song in her voice using lyrics that she never wrote or music that she never sang that sounds like you're singing. So it's a fairly shocking, wonderful, disturbing thing. So there is that possibility, although we're not so interested in algorithmically produced music. For us, it's all about the sort of the theatrical representation of this Turing test.
That actually segues really nicely into another question that's further down in the queue, but I'm going to bring it up now because it connects. But Tyler, you touched on this a little bit, but in terms of GPT-2 being a collaborator as a group, how much control do we find ourselves giving over to the AI from a methodological perspective? Tyler, you just talked a little bit about the kind of getting us out of our boxes of thinking and sort of busting us out of parameters a little bit, but I wondered, I'm going to throw this over to Dakota a little bit, and then whoever else can jump in. But control and GPT-2, from your opinion, like how much control does GPT-2 have in our process?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I just want to say, I think control is a very kind of an interesting, kind of jarring word actually to think about in our process, because it feels like most of what we've been targeting is kind of relinquishing control in some ways. So I think that's kind of just a sidebar, answer that it kind of like over time, I feel like we've developed a kind of unified voice, or a unified kind of like ecosystem of voices and ideas in interacting with the language models and with each other. So the idea of control is hard to kind of pinpoint in this context, but if I change it to something more like filtering or kind of selecting or curating, I think we find ourselves generally, and as the kind of coordinator of the devising activities for much of it, we tend to kind of use the output of the language model as inspiration or as source material, if you will, and then think of our kind of creating process together as a transformation of that material, or an elaboration on it, if you will. So some of it does make it to the end, as you kind of heard in the Britney inspired, the possibly Britney inspired tune, as Matthew said, and in the opening, but also, as you suspect, and as these questions are indicating, an overwhelming majority of it doesn't make it very far at all, because it's, either extremely prejudiced or sort of nonsensical. And so I think we find ourselves pretty much filtering until we find that it's reached a kind of transformation level of satisfaction of the collective voice or idea. It's my best first attempt at that, if anybody else wants to jump in.
Well, and I think what's also really exciting is as we've continued to grow in this process, and in our devising sessions, we've put in text from the AI and that we have generated. And now, Matthew described how the stage version of this is inevitably going to be somewhat of a live Turing test for the audience. And in devising with this machine, we've found ourselves kind of creating a Turing test for ourselves, because we're putting in text and at this point somewhat not sure if it was one of us that wrote it or if it was the computer that wrote it, and if it was a mixture of the two. So I think the blurring of the lines has become really exciting in our process also.
Yeah. Hugh, you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I spot another question that's on this theme, which is further down the list from Liz. What kind of dramaturgical questions do you ask when you receive the GPT-2's text? And how do you prioritize which text from the AI becomes part of the final script? I think that's in the same vein. I think we do a lot of editing on it, of course, but I think what we do try to play in both in our devising games and when we're playing with GPT-2 or 3 is to try and go through massive chunks of text and discern patterns, see what kind of things come up again and again, or what kind of arguments appear again and again. So that's definitely one of the kind of dramaturgical processes that we apply to it. I don't know if anyone else has any other response to that.
I would just say, go ahead, Dakota.
No, you go.
I was just going to say that this piece, as Matthew mentioned before, we're not interested in doing a biopic. It's an opera about ideas, and as Hugh said, like rhythm, pattern, those are the kinds of dramaturgical principles that we'll be playing with a lot. It'll be less about there's a story that we're arcing out and more an accumulation of ideas that we arc out into a kind of rhythmic pattern that hopefully will result in a meaningful, rich experience for an audience member.
Just one thing really quickly that I think is worth saying is, so when Hugh and I went to visit the King's College archive and sat there and read the papers back to back in this marathon reading session, and we weren't allowed to speak to each other because it was a really small room, and they were very concerned that we would disrupt everybody else. But we had these sort of mind-blowing moments when we would read marginalia that Turing wrote. What's really interesting is that GPT-2 preserved the way that Turing wrote. The algorithm preserved the voice. So Turing wrote obviously in a scientific, somewhat dispassionate way, but also in a slightly awkward fashion, and the algorithm preserves that. So I think that's one of the great, really exciting things, is that we feel like his voice in terms of the way that he wrote and thinks is somehow preserved in the responses that we get back from the AI.
Great. I'm seeing sort of follow-up questions, and there are a couple of questions that I want to flag that sort of connect to the ethical side of some of this that I want to bring into the room. Someone has asked, I'm going to find it now because I was, what are your thoughts on the way AI reflects our prejudices and systemic oppressions, i.e. data profiling algorithms targeting minorities, because that is how the AI has been taught. Who wants to take this? I don't know who to send this.
I can start a little bit. I feel like that it is yeah, they are a little bit terrifying in a way, because they do to get them to work. You have to not only with GPT-2, for example, we're feeding it very specific data sets, but that's actually fine tuning. Like we're practically just adding at the end, sprinkling kind of the things that we want to work with within the AI. But the rest of the model, GPT-2, is actually a collection, a scrape, and depending on how much of it scrapes, right, or how much of it accumulates in terms of like the internet, I think is sort of the data sample that they're using, is that they just send out a crawler. It just collects tons and tons of text from the internet and uses that data. So it's gonna collect everything, and it's gonna collect things that are not pretty, because the internet is kind of a pretty scary place in its kind of entirety. So that like, yeah, in a way the AI reflects kind of in a way our own humanity in perfect, right? It's not going to be there are ways, and there's ways to curate that, and I think a lot of the people that are coding systems to interact with artificial intelligence in language models, there's a lot of effort in trying to kind of monitor and filter and take care of it. But yeah, it is imperfect, and it does sometimes say pretty inappropriate things. but that's just because the majority of the data it's trained on is just swaths of the internet without any real detail.
Thanks, Vlad. Anyone else want to add? Should we move on to the next question? So there's a great question here that I want to pull up. What would you want to achieve in making this an in-person experience rather than an online or screen performance? I'm going to take a stab and then I'm going to hand it off to someone else. This team has heard me say this before, but I'm maybe the most analog person in this room, in this Zoom room. But I often talk about that moment when either as a group, when we're devising together, where something beautiful happens and the language and the text kind of comes together in this beautiful way, or when GPT-2 spits out something that we're just like, what? And the feeling that gives, at least me, is something like a seance, like we're somehow communing in some way with Alan Turing. And I think there's something very magical about bringing people together into an actual room in real time and thinking about what is the structure of a seance and how can we be thinking about technology and computers in a way that is very sensorial. At the end of the day, we spend a lot of time stroking screens with our hands, and there's a lot of intimacy that exists there. So the in-person element that of theater, and we also all love theater, is the other part of this, and that's what we spend a lot of our time and energy making. But I think there's a really interesting juxtaposition between the kind of perceived distance of technology and the intimacy of technology, and for us, that moment when we know that we've made something that really fits with what we're doing, and that kind of hairs on the back of the neck, Alan Turing is in the room with us feeling. So that's my attempt to answer that question. If other folks want to chime in, please.
I mean, I'll also say, as a sound designer for theater, it's what really gets me excited is having control of the experience for the audience in a way that is, you know, every room that you go into is kind of a different character for us when we're talking about sound. In the theater, we have the opportunity to really use it in a physical domain too, and can create visceral responses and really shape the physical feeling in the room. So I think as a sound designer, I always prefer a room where I can, you know, choose if it's like coming from where, how much is the sub shaking your ass so much that it's just like you can feel it in your bones. You know, that's something you can't get if it's, you know, people listening on their laptop speakers or earbuds or something, you know, that we really get that sort of control and full experience in the theater.
I'll also add a little bit that I think is interesting to think about, because I feel like our intention was from the beginning was originally to make a live Turing performance, and just situationally we find ourselves exploring these other mediums, which has been kind of interesting in a sense, because now we've developed this website which I've sank a lot of time into, that I feel like in a normal theatrical process we probably wouldn't have done. We've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this work on screen and online, and playing with these kind of devising techniques so that we can work kind of at a distance altogether, which I feel like these are all things that we would have never probably tried. So I think it's opened up this world of opportunities. But I think, yeah, I think in a way this opera has worked and will continue to work in a variety of mediums probably too, right? I think that there's something about the way that we're exploring different things will affect ultimately how we kind of piece together this final performance. So I think yeah, figuring out, you know, do we end up using streaming elements? Do we use some of the kind of web interface things to kind of exchange data and with the audience? You know, there's going to be, I think, a lot of things that can come out of this period that will affect kind of how we kind of piece together the final form. Yeah.
See another question here. It's from Andrew again, purely technical question, but how do you gain access to the AI, and where do you input your text and questions? And I think Dakota, you might be able to show us on a screen share of
yeah. I'll just like share my screen real quick and show you what we're kind of working with, and it'll be really fast. Let me make sure I have the right window. So you should have a browser window. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially, we, along with a lot of help from the Digital Humanities Lab and with Fareed, the programming intern at the CCAM, we built this really simple interface to interact with the language model. So we've got some stuff kind of behind the scenes where we trained that I won't show you the code and the low level stuff, but where we trained the model on some writing of Turing and some of the stuff he read. And it's essentially just like there's a bunch of Python code running in the background that's running the server. The hard part about hosting this is that it requires a lot of GPU power in particular. So we have a server that's generously kind of allowed to us by the Digital Humanities Lab. So our team has access to this by VPNing. If you try that link, it won't work for you, unfortunately. But we do have access to this model, and we can kind of type in, adjust a variety of parameters with GPT-2 and try to get responses from it. We have considered, many times we've considered trying to open this to more people besides our team. And the short answer is that it really comes back to that ethical question and that prejudice question, that it's really easy to implement filters on words and phrases that are no-nos, right? We've already done that. We've said certain words and phrases are just not allowed. We'll never get those. It's much, much harder to filter ideas, more especially like larger abstract ideas that are deeply embedded in the patterns of the internet. So until we really figure that out, which, I don't want to understate that as a small problem, that's a massive problem to work out. I'm not sure that we'll be kind of opening that interface to the general public for a while.
Yeah. I think also, though, Andrew, and for people that are interested, these, at least GPT-2, not GPT-3, because it's so much larger, it's not accessible. GPT-2 you could download yourself. It takes a bit of code experience with Python, but I have it running personally to do my image work. I did have to run it on a parallel, like I couldn't get it working on Windows, so it works a little bit better on Linux personally. I know it works all right on Mac. I had a lot of issues on Windows, but it's something that you could download and train yourself. So
yeah, that's a very good point. It's open source is the key there. The core models.
GPT-2 is
GPT-2 is open source. The core models of it are.
Just to quickly go back to I think the point that Liz was making in her question about what we can do when we get a live audience. I mean, we are thinking of having some kind of online installation which would run in parallel with the live performance. Let's just say that the music is going to be set in a conventional compositional way, but we're trying to figure out ways in which we can build in receiving, for example, a text from an audience member that could be fed back and sung back sort of relatively in real time. So each performance might actually have some differences. So having that kind of flexibility is something that we're looking at. And again, it comes back to the idea of the audience discovering that they are complicit in a Turing test.
Great. I'm going to read a comment that is directed to Vlad. I'm sure you can see it, or flip dots. I'd just like to share my thoughts on creative coding explored through flip dot display by Vlad. I believe the attention paid to each design of imagery on the dot display allows us to hear the sound of each particular dot, which is interpretation of algorithms encoding AI. Its variety of positioning in space, I think it enhances the soundscape of overall experience when it will be in person. So someone here really responding to the sensory experience of the flip dots as a kind of translation of what algorithmic action might look like or feel like. Yeah. Hugh, are there any other questions that you feel like we've missed in this thread that you really want to bring into the room? And if folks have final thoughts or questions, we've got about 5 minutes. I think.
Yeah, there's one here from Christine. She says, I was wondering, in terms of the AI and the very tech side of things, did you all approach it as creatives working in the theater and opera, so indeed as people searching for a story, or is there anyone exploring it purely as a data scientist? Where, or is there a line for you between the form as a standalone, which I think is really fascinating, and using it as a device to make an opera as a bottom line?
Yeah, so something that's sort of interesting to the group at large, and there are some others, colleagues here at Yale, who are fascinated by visual representations of data. So we've done some experiments in that in conjunction with neuroscience, genetics, and lately looking at collective behavior of animals, so flocking and schooling. So there are sort of some allied projects that are on the periphery of this that we are slowly kind of filtering into it. So it's sort of generated quite a community of endeavor, which is really exciting and somewhat sort of overwhelming, quite frankly. But yeah, it's a great comment.
This is also a great follow-up to that, actually, Matthew, which was also a question in the thread, that Alan Turing is such a natural fit for this process, but is this process seeding other topics for folks? So you just talked about flocking and sort of the visual representation of data. For everyone in this group, creative group, are there other ideas that are coming to the surface for you, for other projects, born out of the experience that we've been having together? It's a wall of silence.
I don't even know where to start almost.
I mean, I feel like it's, for me, it's becoming less and less about the concrete Alan Turing, like the person that existed, and more about the legacy and the perception and idea of his work and what he left behind, which I think is really, like just a super fascinating shift to encounter.
And I think what's also exciting about Alan Turing is he really, with working with AI, he was so kind of ahead of his time and in like a philosophical way, thinking about what is intelligence. And he was always taking mathematics and things and putting them and seeing how they fit with the natural world. So I think what's been super exciting in this exploration is just like what is, and seeing all these patterns and what the AI is generating has further deepened my understanding of what my own intelligence is and kind of what makes us human, because I feel like that's often the blowback of AI is like, well, it's not intelligence or consciousness because it doesn't have these things that I have as a human. But I found too, in how much data mining goes on in the world and everything, that like as humans, our intelligence is starting to show that we are a subset of data and different things too. So I think it's been a really interesting philosophical thing to think about, as well as technical.
I think just piggybacking on that, Tyler, that to me is part of why it is so essential that it's a live experience. There's something like deeply human and physical and organic about this technological idea. And so to separate us from each other and other human bodies in space would kind of be missing a crucial element of what's at the heart of the piece.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. And Matthew, I'm just going to hand it over to you if there's any acknowledgements or appreciations you want to offer before we hand it over to Andrew to close us out.
Well, first we'd like to thank Andrew and Emily for hosting us and walking us through this process. And so big thanks to you and everybody at Level Up. This has been a wonderful opportunity. This is our first international engagement, so we're thrilled about that. We'd also like to thank those at Yale that are supporting us. So we've already mentioned the Digital Humanities Lab, which is part of the Yale University Library, the Yale Center for British Art, and in particular, the Yale Center for Collaborative Arts and Media, directed by Dana Kawas, who have been wonderful in supporting us. And I personally would love to thank all of the team. It's been a remarkable thing that you can get this many people together twice a week to work on this project. And I would also like to thank, of course, the archive and the archivists at King's College, Cambridge. They've been wonderful also. So thank you all.
Hi, thank you everyone so much for being here. This has been absolutely fantastic, really quite interesting, and I'm so excited to see where you go with this. And I've signed up for the website on your Instagram, and I really recommend everyone that's watching to take the chance to take the time to head to the website, sign up, and keep tabs on where you go with this project. So thank you all for sharing today. Really.